Best panel ever. Best panel to date, huh? Cheers. We already won. This can't go wrong. hold my beer. Watch this. Somebody take this out of the way.
You don't want me to have it.
So good morning, and welcome to our 9:30 Sunday morning panel on culture, or as I like to call it, between two Seans. I am as pleased to be here as I am caffeinated, which is to say very. And if this were any normal Sunday, I would have already been up for 4 hours entertaining two children under the age of 5. So this is a lovely change of pace for me. I would like to thank DEF for inviting me to be here. And I'd also like to thank my lovely wife for taking on extra shifts with the kids this weekend. There is a good chance that she will be at DEF 2020 and I will be home with kids.
Good call.
But seriously, we have assembled a fantastic panel for you this morning on a topic that has been touched upon repeatedly over the weekend, but that we're going to tackle head on this morning with multiple well-informed, moderately well-informed perspectives. And I encourage you to ask challenging questions when the opportunity arises a little bit later in the panel, because it's often through difficult discussions that we get to those beautiful nuggets of truth that we're all desperately seeking. So please do not hold back. And along those lines, I do want to take a second and remind everyone, this is a safe space. So if you would think about this room really as a nest in a tree of trust, as it were. No, our objective today is to get to have an honest conversation and get to the no kidding, tangible, tactical level tips, tools, tricks, and methods that you all can take and starting tomorrow, implement or experiment back at your office. So that's what we're trying to do today, and I encourage you to help us achieve that goal because we're all in this together. Now, it's my great privilege to introduce the 5 distinguished panelists that are sharing the stage today. Now, you can all read their bios on the website, so I asked them to give me something a little bit more personal for the introduction, and we'll just get started. So first, I'd like to introduce Sean Murphy from the Air Force Office of the Surgeon General. He's an Irish pediatrician and recently became grandfather to a beautiful granddaughter just last week, Charlie. He played 20 years of rugby and was able to travel the world playing on U.S. military teams, and he's always ready to stir up the audience with an Irish joke or two, so here's hoping. Next, we have Meg Vorland. She was the first person to join the Dcode founder and make the company a team of 2. And since then, she has led everything from product development to defining and fostering the company culture. Meg is known for her fearless leadership, contagious laugh, and friendly competitiveness from her collegiate athlete days, and not returning my calls. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. She and her husband play volleyball every weekend outside, and they bring their little 9-month-old baby Lee in tow sometimes, who will be here later to sign autographs. Next is Brian Kroger. He's a self-admitted zealot for values-driven everything. He uses his values motto, humble, fearless, kind, both at home with his 3 kids and also as a leader in the workplace. To help with the fearless part, Brian used to put headphones in before acquisition meetings at Hanscom and play a blast a rap playlist called 6 Foot 7 Foot, which I'm guessing is not a Harry Belafonte reference. I don't know. Maybe I've dated myself with that reference. Next is Jason Korman. Many of you know him from the culture panel, culture mini workshop yesterday. Don't worry, he saved all the good stuff for this morning. At the age of 24, he created La Crema Winery from the assets of a bankrupt Sonoma County wine producer, and eventually farmed almost 200 acres of vineyard in Northern California. In his spare time, Jason enjoys roasting coffee beans from all over the world and taking long walks with his son Alex and his rescue dog Bear. I got it right. So all week I've been practicing that, and every time I say it, it's his rescue bear dog, which creates a very different mental image. So, woo, all right, it's all downhill from here. And lastly, our second Sean Heritage. After 25 years in the Navy and a short stint at DIU, he is now the head of platform adoption at Authenticate. He loves college football and spends countless hours watching his son follow a black line in a water-filled rectangle. Spoiler alert, it's a pool. I had to look that up. Which leads me to me, and you all know who I am, so I need no introduction. No, I am Greg Bernard, and I was really disappointed because I missed the first part of the conference on Friday, but it was because after 16 years, I was separating from the Department of Homeland Security. So for all of you who have drinks. And as of tomorrow, I am joining the DoD family and starting at Ensign. So very excited to be here. I can't think of a more auspicious or perfect way to start my new adventure than by being here at DEF this morning. So thank you all for having me. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask each panelist a question to begin, and then I have a couple questions for the group, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. So Jason, we're going to start with you. What are the most important things that people do not understand about culture?
What a softball question.
I know, right? You've never heard that before.
I had a feeling you might ask that question, so I prepared a list. How much time do I have?
2.5 minutes.
Okay. So first off, for those folks who were not in the workshop yesterday.
And that's time. So
it's good. Thank you. By the way, could we get another beer?
What?
Is that possible? Get another beer?
Another one?
Yeah.
Yeah, can we get another beer?
So first off, for the folks who weren't in the workshop yesterday, culture is actually a management system. It is a way of designing your people so that you can get consistent execution over a long period of time. So first, that it is designable and that it is a management system. And that fundamentally, culture is a social construct, so you can't train for it. You can onboard it, you can get people indoctrinated, but once they're in, they have to learn socially. And that means they've got a copy, and it means that you need to have things and artifacts within the environment that drive alignment to the cultural norms. It's not, I know this will disappoint a lot of people, an HR thing, right? Actually, the competencies of HR, which are mostly about enforcement and rules, have nothing to do with culture, really. So try to pull it away from your HR folks. Are there any HR folks in the room? Okay. So,
safe space, tree of trust. You know?
So next, it is really about having a system of beliefs that drive behaviors, right? So you've got to design the fundamental psychology of the beliefs and mindsets that will drive. Thank you. I was kidding, but okay. There we go. We're prepared now. So,
this is a room of doers.
Well, you know, I was doing my best to work through the first one. So you have to design the psychology that will deliver the behaviors that you want. So it's really not about values. It's about the conditions that have to exist in order for those values to actually take place. And lastly, well, redundant. So we had this discussion yesterday. I don't know how many of you folks were in the workshop, but we talked about the fact that core values are really a non-starter, and all people ever talk about with culture is core values, and it's mostly bullshit. So what we need to do is we need to get the precursor beliefs and mindsets that will drive those values and deliver those values, because values typically are very complex behaviors, and so we have to deconstruct it for people. So there you go, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, start next up. You have seen over 38 years in the Air Force. So how can the government, how can the government thaw the middle, or can the government even thaw the middle?
So like any good politician, I'll answer your question with a question. No, I'm just kidding. So I think, how can we not? That's really the point. That's the point of being here. That's the point of kind of everybody sitting here and what Jeremiah said. How can we not? Because if you look at all organizations and where organizations are going, or you look at peer competitors, and I'll go past that, we're going to get our butts kicked. Period. Dot. And I think all you got to do is think back. So in the late 70s and stuff, there were these Japanese car makers, you know, Toyota and everything, and America laughed at them. I remember a friend's dad having one, you know, and fixing it and tootling with it and whatever, and it wasn't the best car. But it wasn't 5 years later when they were the best in market. And why was that? Because the American auto industry sat on its ass, because it thought it was so far ahead that they would never. The Japanese? Are you kidding me? Right? And so now we can go to, you know, we can talk about Russia and China. Heck with Russia and China. Let's talk North Korea. Right? All kinds of resources, all kinds of ingenuity, all kinds of, no. But they just tell their middle what to do and it does it, or they get, you know, shot or blown up by a cannon or something. And the point is, remember just a few years ago when people were laughing at their missile program because every missile that went off the pad blew up, right? Did not take 6 months to a year after a few blew up that they did not blow up. And again, and again, and again. So when we all, let's not talk about government, when we all talk about organizations that we take part in or participate in, and we're thinking as a nation, you know, the great US of A, I think that the great US of A needs to pay attention to this, and many are, to understand that our strength and power as a great nation really hugely comes from our innovation and our ability to fail fast. And so I think as we move on, that we need the Jeremiahs and the you and you and you and you and you, and have those kind of flat organizations, because the difference is made at the front line, right? Solutions come from the front line. They certainly don't come from the Pentagon. It's my third time there, I can promise you that. It comes from those who are doing the work. And so I think that's what we need to pay attention to. And if you do that, I don't think there will ever be a frozen middle, because they will always feel thawed.
Thank you. Meg, yes, well done. So what lessons and ideas can the government pull from the private sector?
Yeah, so this is a question that could take all day to answer, right? We want to pull all of these things from the private sector, but I want to actually talk a little bit about what you said in my answer, in that solutions come from the front line, and as we see it, the private sector has put in place the constructs. This is a construct to be able to pull those up, to be able to pull those solutions up and fail fast, which is buzzwordy. But what do I mean by that? But it really looks like pulling some of those solutions to the front lines in a small, manageable way to create buy-in. And when it comes down to it, we have a wave coming through, not just the Department of Defense, but across the government generally, for innovation mindsets, the innovation type of mentality. And it's really getting those solutions from the front line, getting those small wins. And I think that the private sector does this really well. Get those small wins. If you're gonna fail early, and then being able to create that ecosystem, create that buy-in across the organization, and bring it up. And so I think that that's really important. And I think the other thing that I take away from the private sector often is just a diversity of thought, opinion, of people in the room, so that you are getting a pretty significant diversity of those solutions when they're coming out and they're bubbling up. Absolutely, you have to also have top cover, and we can go both directions. But I think that that's one thing or two things, sorry, that the private sector is doing really well.
Great, thank you. Brian, what were the biggest hurdles that Kessel Run faced in driving organizational and cultural change, and how did you overcome them?
So first I want to say that I'm sitting in the middle, but I'm not frozen, which is appropriate because I don't like the term. I don't believe in the frozen middle, and hopefully we get a chance to talk about that. But yeah, with Kessel Run, I think a lot of people always want to focus on all the external hurdles that you have to face. The biggest hurdles you're going to face as you're driving change are actually internal hurdles around culture and around values. And they're with your own people and not even necessarily their interaction with the outside, the naysayers. And so one of the biggest challenges that I would say in terms of hurdles, the biggest hurdle is that there's a never-ending stream of hurdles and they keep getting bigger. And you always think like, once we get that senior leader in our corner, once we get that funding, once we get that we're like over the crest, but the crest never comes. It's just a mountain that you just can't see. You don't have the perspective to see it until you're there. And so overcoming that is a couple of things. I think you really need a strong network of people, and they're going to be some internal. It's also going to be part of your network of champions. And I rely on those people for two things. One is something that Josh Marcuse, who's sitting right here, and you got to ask him about this. I'm going to make this awkward for him. He taught me that you have to pump each other's bunnies. So Josh taught me about pumping bunnies. So you'll have to wait to ask him what that means. But really about, you get deflated and you got to pump each other back up and get back in the fight. And then the other thing is you really, there's a crushing weight of bureaucracy that's on top of you, and to keep going and to do all of those things that's required to scale, there's no magic. Everybody, the magic of Kessel Run, there's no magic, a lot of warts. It's all just a lot of really hard work. Shameless plug, I have a whole talk on this on YouTube that you can check out about scaling leadership, not technology, because that's the hard part. Doing that, you're going to have to set up a group of people that can have the passion and perseverance that it takes, this grit, right? So one of my favorite books, Angela Duckworth, Grit, she talks about passion. Passion isn't something that people have. We all like to say, find your passion. She says, no, build your passion, grow your passion. And you have to get really good at getting a group of people who are getting beat up all day long, all day, every day, and give them the passion they need to get through it. That's the only thing that will get you through the never-ending stream of hurdles is passion. So I would say there are concrete things you can do. It's not hand-wavy of how do you grow passion in your people? How do you get people on fire at work? All the other problems that you face, you can overcome them if you have passionate, gritty people that are dedicated to the mission.
And Sean, what is your opinion of pumping buddies? No. So actually, Brian, you did a great setup for us here. So, Sean, you also take issue with the term the frozen middle. So where does that come from, and how else do you think we might refer to that portion of the team that so many of us are attempting to change?
So I'd like to zoom out a little bit and just talk in general about the language that we use. So one of the things that I like to do is just observe people, observe the words that are used in a room. So just some examples over the course of the last couple of days. Go back to day one, there was a nice panel on the defense industrial base, right? It's framed around the defense industrial base and not the national security innovation base. National security strategy gave us an opportunity to reframe that part of the larger team, right? DIB bad, NSIB good. When we talk about DIB, we usually talk about it, not the Defense Innovation Board. The Defense Industrial Base, it's in a negative sense. It's an us and a them, right? That's unhealthy. I've heard the terms a few times talking about one of the biggest obstacles to us enjoying the culture that we need is old white men, right? Once again, creating another us and them. And I offer that the frozen middle, that term is not inclusive at all, right? And I offer to each of us that the frozen middle is not frozen. The middle of our organization is actually the most responsive to the incentives that we have in place. And in essence, that they are acting exactly as our incentive structure wants them to, right? So we should not vilify them. I don't think that there's anybody here in this room who would raise their hands if I said, who's a member of the frozen middle, right? But there are people across the middle of different organizations represented here. And yesterday we had a nice session on diversity and inclusion. You know, Jeremiah's point this morning about the lack of enlisted representation here is telling, right? I would offer that in many ways we are an echo chamber, right? Jeremiah did a great talk. I think a very different audience needs to hear Jeremiah's talk. And that my hope for next year, I'm alongside you, Jeremiah, how do we get more people who aren't here? How many people are from the program offices are here? Anybody, right? The people that we're trying to help inspire change across are not here. We are united in our desire to change, but the folks that we are trying to help give reason to alter their behavior are not. So the term that I would offer is the malleable middle, right? So let's change the incentive structure, and therefore we will change behavior.
I jump in on that?
Yeah.
So another thing that I would offer up is it's not in the middle of the organization. It exists across all levels of the organization, this behavior that we deem frozen. I agree that a lot of it has to do with incentives. There's also another thing that you see play out very often, and that's that it's human psychology. And so if you look at Crossing the Chasm, where we talk about technology adoption, it's a bell curve of people and how they adopt technology, and then there's the chasm, right? And the same thing applies to culture, or any new idea, is how people adopt it from a human psychology and particularly organizational psychology perspective. And the middle is really the people in the middle of that bell curve. It doesn't matter. They exist at all levels of the organization. And what I think the really important takeaway from Crossing the Chasm is he says you can't market to two groups at once of these segments that he's identified. And he says you also shouldn't market to them until you've met their expectations. You would never market a product to somebody that you know doesn't meet their expectations. People naturally have different expectations. We can say that they're unfair. You know, you're an innovator, you're a crazy pioneer. You'll see one little thing and think it can change the world. You shouldn't expect everybody to be able to make that logical leap. And so I would say that we all need to be a lot more introspective of, have you met that person's criteria for this idea? Have you proven to them what needs to be proven for them to adopt your idea? And I'll say at Kessel Run, we aren't even, well, I'm gone now, I say we a lot. When I left, and I would say it's still true, and they would agree, we have a ton left to prove. We've barely scratched the surface of all of the things we need to prove to the defense community about how to do software at scale organically. We're not even close. And so as great as Kessel Run is, and as much props as I would give it, we have a lot left to do, we have a lot left to prove, and we should all be a lot more humble about what we've actually proven versus what we know we can prove tomorrow, because not everybody else can see that connection.
Great. So building on this, there's a great Walt Kelly quote that says, "We have met the enemy and he is us." So, say again? Yes. So how do you know if you're part of the frozen middle or the malleable middle? I mean, you asked the question, Sean, and nobody raised their hand. Well, how would people know if they're in that space to cross the chasm? This is for the group.
So I think if you're more invested in the system than you are in getting the job done, then that's a great indicator. So, or, you know, do you show up every day invested in making sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, or are you actually focused on making stuff happen? You know, it's really about whether you view your role as being effective or just sort of being part of the system. And that difference is a mindset, I think, is an indicator.
This way.
So I think that it is crazy to think that we're going to break down this frozen middle or whatever we want, whatever language we want to use around it in one fell swoop, right? And I think that if you look, people in this room, just by self-selecting to be in this room, are probably not in the frozen middle. So I think we can take one step further from that and say that what people in this room do need to do is recognize those people who are going to be champions and going to help, and that they can actually get to, if we've done a small project, if we've gotten to version 1, they can find those people who it's correct timing to market to and get that buy-in so that they can get more champions and get a little bit further along that bell curve. So I think it's a little bit less about like self-identifying as being part of the frozen middle. I think nobody wants, even people who, you know, you would actually look at and say, you are the frozen middle. Nobody wants to be that, but giving them the opportunity to not be, and in small, de-risked ways, I think is really, really important for the entire culture.
Yeah, go ahead. All right. So what I would say is, and be empathetic to people's expectations. Going back to that is like, I would love it if we lived in a world where I could set other people's expectations of me and the things that especially my spouses. I'm sure a lot of people fall into that category, but we don't. So we have to understand, I mean, the key to a successful marriage is the same key to a successful organization, is you have to meet people where they are, understand what their expectations are, and it's your job as a leader to meet them. And so that's why I don't like terms like thaw the frozen middle or bust the bureaucracy. It's really just about meeting people where they are and satisfying their expectations as you can, when you can. And that's how you grow a coalition or grow a real movement.
I'd suggest if one wants to move organizations, that the construct's a little different, which is that the people who show up or who are in or you might label them as being in the frozen middle, they don't even know, right? They're not aware. They just show up and do whatever they've been told to do. Right, and so the first step is making them aware that there's a different reality, that there's a different way of doing things, and creating tension around a different reality is really the first step. So we ran I think Mr. Knudsen was there, a thing at Edwards, and towards the end of a 45-minute sort of workshop, somebody put their hand up and said, "I think I'm part of the problem." But that's where you have to get people to. Like, they show up, doing what they're doing, thinking what they're thinking, and there is a trigger at some point where they go, oh shit, there's a different reality, right? It's like I didn't even know it was possible to look at the work differently, right? And so, but that doesn't happen because we live in environments where tension is bad, provocation is bad, we all have to be very polite and do the right thing and all that, but that's nonsense. Because in the absence of creating tension and showing people that things can be done differently and making them a little bit uncomfortable, things will never change. So what we want to have happen is we want to show up and we want everything to be the same, but at the same time we want stuff to change, and you can't do that. It doesn't work. So we've got to show people that there's a different way of making stuff happen. Sir.
So yes, so shining the light. Yesterday, J.J. Sutherland talked about making the work visible, making the progress visible. And I joked with Brian the other day saying, I hope that next DEF we don't talk about Kessel Run at all. Why? Because there's so many other good things to talk about. We don't have to talk about something that excited us 3 years ago. There's other things that are equally exciting. So shining the light on things. So Naval X, where's any Naval X teammates here? No, they're out. They're out shining the light on other things. Naval X is really good in that they aren't doing anything new per se, but they are shining the light on the great things that are being done and showing people how they could behave, right? The things they could be doing, right? That is the values. That is the values that we want to incentivize. Again, back to that word, we recognize and reward that which we want people to emulate. So if you keep shining the light on the goodness that's happening, there's plenty of goodness out there. The hope is that others will follow.
So coming at this from a different layer of the organization. So in healthcare, if people didn't know it, we have a very dysfunctional healthcare system in the United States of America. And if you read the books, we create a ton of harm. And to the point of dropping multiple planes out of the sky every year, in killing that number of people within our healthcare systems. So we've looked at that, and we've looked at flying, and we've looked at culture, and we looked at different things, and about 5 years ago really took that on head on in the military health system, and specifically I'll talk about our Air Force journey because I think it applies here on setting a foundation that actually then creates an organization and a culture of innovation, and how that can happen and how hard it is. And so really the goal is zero harm, right? When you go to see your doctor, go in a hospital, last thing you want to do is get harmed. The last thing we want to do as medics is to harm you. It's a very complex, complicated system. So what we did is bring in the high reliability system of flying, Air Force, and why planes don't fall out of the sky all over the U.S. and or the world in general. And so bringing in the same principles and actually bringing in the foundation and principles, respect for others, focusing on the front line, getting any issue that happens into detail. You know, we have 9 of them that are like the Bible on who we are as individual medics. And then this has been a 5 or 6 year journey, so this did not happen overnight. To concrete that into the facilities, we have huddles, mandatory huddles at the clinic level with the teams. You know, the night before is checking the patients coming in, making sure nobody should maybe be seen today that's scheduled for tomorrow. You know, a little chest pain on your thing for tomorrow. I probably want to call that patient tonight, right? And so we're catching these things and then huddling in the morning with the team. And if there's any issues in that clinic or hospital from that huddle, the front line, then that gets elevated to the huddle that happens in every one of our facilities or hospitals at about 7 or 8 in the morning. So by that time, that hospital leadership absolutely knows if anything's going awry within their facility. And so this is standard work. And so Airman Snuffy and Captain Who's It or Lieutenant Who's It has a direct line to that commander every single day. And each month we have what we call, because we call the thing trusted care, we have trusted care heroes. So that commander, for any one of their airmen that did something that it's usually wrapped around patient safety and saving something, but it could be in logistics or other things outside, has one of these individuals, they just submit that to the Deputy Surgeon General of the Air Force. And I sign those letters every month. And personally put a little smiley face, because for me, they saved a life. I see every error that happens for years. I've been for about 20 years. You want to know about psychological disturbance? You know, that is tough. So this is personal to me to not have that happen. And those airmen know this is personal to me and personal to them. But the point on the culture of empowerment is they have the direct line right to their, straight up to the MAGCOMs. To me, these letters go out every month, and a coin to the one that I thought impacted mostly on that principle that we focused on that month. And that's been going on for 5 years. The hard thing is that's been going on for 5 years. And when you study in industry and stuff, that's when you start getting lackadaisical because the brightness is off. And so that is where now it is up to us to keep that going, and is very, very hard. But the foundation is set to have no frozen middle. And Jeremiah can send me an email. Captain Who's It can send me an email. I got people all over sending me emails. And those I read first. Then I read the 3- and 4-star emails each day, because I know those are somebody that really needs some help or advice. So I think those are the things organizationally that we're going to have to figure out in other parts of industry and junk, and I don't know exactly how to do that.
So I want to build on that, and yesterday in the diversity panel, we talked about the value of perspectives, and Meg, you talked about the diversity of thought. So at DHS, we started something that we called the 7th inning stretch. So once a week, we scheduled 30 minutes on everyone's calendar for them to just get up from their desk, go somewhere off-site, and sit down with people that they don't normally work with, across teams, and just talk about things, right? Get to know people, trying to almost force serendipity, those serendipitous encounters that create these kind of beautiful moments of collaboration. So what else can agencies do to identify and engage untapped internal talent?
So I think one thing, like you talked about, was being able to be accessible up the chain, for sure. I know I see it in the private sector often, whether it's a stand-up, think like the agile methodologies, principles, doing a stand-up at the beginning, making sure that things are open and transparent. In the government context, it's harder, right? In a lot of ways, it's going to be harder. But it's also, you have the opportunity in a lot of places across the government to have smaller teams, to have teams that can have that can build on some of this momentum, and smaller teams that can be extremely transparent within what they're doing, and some of that will roll up, and you can have an incredible amount of access based on who's leading from the top of those. But I think that breaking it down into those smaller teams, and really we do this in our work all the time, which is we have these stand-up agile type of check-ins to make sure everybody's on the same page. And what are the problems that are boiling up in my work? It's not that people are dying, and so it's even more important to be able to have those open lines of communication.
I think to touch on the diversity or the diversity of thought piece is. I mentioned this yesterday on Twitter. The diversity and inclusion conversation, I think a lot gets lost in translation between the two groups. What I'll say is, and at Kessel Run, we tried really hard to establish diversity, and we are failing still. They are still failing. It is really hard. We already have a pool that's not very diverse that we're pulling from, the U.S. Air Force. And then on top of that, you've got OPM and all these things that actually get in the way of good people trying to do good things with diversity and inclusion. But why I think that it's important, yes, diversity of thought is the thing we want. Actually, the ultimate goal is mission outcomes, right? And then I like to walk back a series of we believe that statements, right? We believe that diversity of thought will lead to the best mission outcomes. And people kind of stop there sometimes and say, yeah, it's about diversity of thought, not diversity of your biography. I say, let's take that one step further, is we believe that psychological safety is what allows diversity of thought to happen in the workplace, right? And so psychological safety means different things for different people, and you have to take a look, and it's going to be different everywhere you are. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach to this, but you have to look at your workforce and the work you're trying to do and decide what it means to create psychological safety for your workplace so that people feel comfortable standing up. And it might not be along gender lines or along ethnic lines. There's a whole bunch of lines that can be drawn across why people don't feel safe coming to the table and then voicing their opinion at the table and their opinion getting heard. But we have to have a serious conversation about that and make sure that we're creating environments where people can thrive and have the safety to have their voice heard.
Do you have anything to say about it? I'll say one thing.
No, go.
Conflict is frequent where candor is safe.
Say that again?
Conflict is frequent where candor is safe. Sean?
Well done. So one of the things I think that this group already gets, but I'll say it anyway, is there is power in celebrating the inefficient and making things personal. So you're not going to be able to build a diverse team unless you get to know people on a human level and have personal conversations with them. That's how you're going to get average. Not going to be a demographics sheet that people fill out. I need to build a diverse team. We have to continue to get to know people on the human level and know when to leverage their unique experiences, expertise, and perspective.
Brilliant.
I want to talk about an area where I don't want diversity, a diversity of principle. I think that there can be no compromise on basic principles. And I'm not sure what your comment meant about kind of like core values are kind of hogwash, but I might agree with one aspect of that. I think what's really important is core values, they drive all of human behavior. And there's only two choices. You can either adopt them unwillingly, absorb them from the culture around you uncritically, or you can devote some mental brain power to thinking about the kind of values you want to have based on the outcomes that you want to achieve. And I love, I'm not a Keynesian, but Keynes has a really great quote where he basically says that everybody that thinks they're outside of intellectual influence is usually the slave of some defunct economist, which is just a fancy way of saying like ideas rule the world and you can either be critical critical about them or not, but they affect the way you live. You're going to be a slave to ideas. And so I think on the values piece, I think what is hogwash of what a lot of consultants try to come in and do is tell people what values they should have. And this is a failed model, and we do this in the military. A great example, how many people do CBTs that try to drill into you what you should believe, what your values and attitudes and beliefs should be around, sexual assault and prevention, or name any topic. That's not how you change people's values. So I believe values are incredibly important, but the way that we try to change them most of the time is a fraud. I really like the NUMI model. If you want to like deep dive into this, there's a This American Life podcast that goes into the NUMI revolution. NUMI was the joint venture between GM and Toyota, back to the Toyota manufacturing. So after Toyota, we stopped laughing at some point and realized they were blowing us out of the water and nobody could figure it out. They would go into the plants, they would photograph the entire plant from ceiling to floor, and they would recreate the plant, and they would have these Ondon cords, but nobody pulled the Ondon cord. Why is that happening, right? And so Toyota comes in, does a joint venture with GM, and you have people, they gave them the Fremont Assembly, which is now the site of Tesla, by the way, fun fact. But it was the worst performing auto manufacturing plant in the United States. It had been shut down. It was so bad, people were drinking on the job, gambling on the job, sabotaging vehicles, putting Coke cans in the door and sealing it up so that you would buy the car and it would rattle as you were driving down the road. You would say that these people have awful values, attitudes, and beliefs. Am I right? Like, and so GM said, hey, we're going to throw you a bone here. We're going to help you take on the union so that you can get new employees. And Toyota said, we don't need to do that. And 3 months later, it was one of the highest performing auto manufacturing plants in the world. And the simple difference is they didn't tell people what to believe. They just showed them a new way to work. Instead of, Simon Sinek's start with why, yes. But when you're trying to change people, you show them the what and how it can change the outcomes, because everybody, I think, has the same intent. We want the mission outcomes, and if you can see that you can get the mission outcomes a different way, then that will slowly change your how, and that will change your why, your values, attitudes, and beliefs. That's how you actually change culture. But I hope that you believe that values are really important, but I'd be curious to, let's have that conversation.
Okay, so I'll explain to you why you're wrong. Here's the thing about core values, right? And I'm not speaking of values, I'm saying core values, right? As they're used in most organizations. In a lot of companies, there's a list of 5 or 6 or 7 or 10. I mean, we've all seen it 1,000 times. You can go on the internet and see there's a list of 30 or 40 most popular ones, and they're all pretty much the same. It's integrity, innovation, teamwork, customer, like things like that, right? So each one of those values represent a complex behavior, a complex outcome. So we say, and innovation is a great one because it's on everyone's list. We need to be innovative. You cannot tell people to be innovative. It just doesn't work. It's a complex outcome. And if you want people to be innovative, then you've got to do all the things before innovation happens to make it happen. So when we talk about core values, they're typically platitudes, and they're reductive. So they are representations of really complex behaviors, and that is why they don't work, and that's why nobody remembers them, because they're not really meaningful. The meaning comes from the beliefs that underpin those values. So we got to start there. Does that make sense? Can we argue some more, please?
I agree. I would maybe say that values drive beliefs. So I would reverse that, but I definitely agree with everything that you said about why people don't remember them. I think that's like maybe switching cause and effect of looking at a dysfunctional organization and why values didn't work in their organization versus looking at organizations that have really powerful values, like Toyota Production System, which is underpinned by their values, or the Netflix culture, which is underpinned by values. But you can't talk about them. The thing that's really powerful about an organization like Netflix is most of those people could give the Netflix culture brief. How many organizations could you walk into where they couldn't give that belief? It's because they lived it. So I agree, you have to live what you say. That's at the core of everything. I hate the platitudes that end up on people's, about us section of their website.
But there's also, you're in a really lucky place where at the DoD, in the across the government, you have people who are coming to you who are signing up for the mission, and that is something that in the private sector, we are super mission focused at my company. It is hard to make sure that people are all in for the mission, and you do have people all in for the mission, and whether you like it or not, like, people want to be part of something bigger, something that they're changing, and the mission at the DoD and the mission across the government is very, very enticing, and is the reason that I think most private sector companies, when you are such a huge bureaucracy and you're so far down the line, you're probably not going to pull back and change. There's only a couple instances where we've seen great success stories on that side, but because you have people across the board that are bought in for the mission, I think that that's where over and over again we have to pull back to. I would love if I could get a whole host of candidates that were all bought into the mission that we're proclaiming, but you, the government, do have that across the board.
So I have about 100 more questions, but rather than me just take up all the time, I want to go ahead and open this up to questions and discussion from the audience. Do we have someone with a mic?
I'll just walk down.
Yeah.
How about this? That means I get first say at all the questions, right?
Thank you. So my question a little bit pulls on the thread that Sean put out about how it's not an us versus them. And I think everyone in this room kind of follows the Defense Innovation Board. We follow DEF. We're interested in what's going on in innovation and changing things. But what I see from the frozen middle or from the execution layer is that they're not getting this. Not that they're not understanding it or not that they're not appreciating it, but they're not getting messaged appropriately about how they can actually do innovation. So looking at professional military education or looking at civilian development seems to be a skill where we're lacking strategic communication at that level, and we're definitely maybe not successful in getting into that curriculum where you can train and help educate people in the moment that they are in their career for future decisions and the frozen middle breakers that we need.
Well, since I have the mic, maybe I'll start. Really quickly, so one of the things that we do as an organization is train a whole bunch of people on not only I get it. All of the rules, regulations, all of these are set up against getting innovation in. But what can we do? And we actually train people on this all the time. What are those things we can do? And then this is a culture panel. Like secret sauce, it comes down to getting that buy-in, using your social capital in the right places, getting that buy-in, showing the wins where you can, touting the heck out of them, and meeting people where they're at.
So that question just drove me right to Cotter's leading change. And if you're ever running into problems in leading change, you don't even have to buy the book. Just Google the 8 steps and follow them, right? So this whole trusted care and zero harm effort, you know, you get it started and you get some small wins, make sure you got a reward system. And now we have high reliability practices built into our training and education system, which for the military is freaking hard. They are a very concrete, so they're not frozen, they're concrete. I think that's worse. And so again, if you go through those as you look at change that you're trying to have, if you are not following those, you will understand why you have failed.
I think there's a huge senior leadership problem at play here, and it's not the one that everybody thinks. Leadership has really latched onto this decentralization, autonomy, and empowerment theme, when what they're really doing is neglectful. It turns out you actually have to lead these changes. You can't just say, we're going to do that at the front lines. Like, yes, those guys are going to do all the work, but there's shit you have to do too. And what really is a telltale sign for me, another big hurdle that one of the biggest hurdles that I'll say that we had externally was us learning the difference between a sponsor and a champion. Sponsors are fickle, especially in the Pentagon. At least when you're doing your VC funding, you have until next quarter to meet at the growth board to figure out if you're going to get money at the Pentagon. They'll just rip it out from under you in the middle of the week and you don't even know. And they lead by who they spoke to last. They do that because they don't have the mental framework and understanding of the efforts that they're engaged in, and it just becomes who they talked to last that had the most influence, pizzazz, best speaker, said AI, blockchain, machine learning enough. And this is a serious problem. So a telltale sign for me is if somebody asks me for an elevator pitch. Okay, Jeff Bezos can ask for an elevator pitch on a new product line inside Amazon because he has the mental framework to understand all of the other extraneous shit that you would try to put into your pitch. He doesn't need to hear that. He understands it. He has the mental framework to just hear your 30 seconds and make a decision, a competent decision. Our senior leaders do not have that to make decisions about digital transformation. They do not. And I will challenge any one of them, they don't have it. That's like a shot across the bow, and it's you have to invest the time, and I know they're the worst. They have the least time of anybody, and I'm very empathetic to their lives. I was just having a conversation with Colonel Brown about the decision to become or not become a general and how demanding that is. I think sometimes we're a little bit unfair with our expectations of our senior leaders, but at the same time, if they really say they want to change, I have to see that they're willing to put in the time to learn the things they need to learn to make competent decisions that drive the change, and that's where I'm really seeing the gap play out.
So I just want to go back to the construct of the frozen middle, and I think that you mentioned training, and you mentioned really this idea of informing people about new processes, procedures, what have you, right? But what we fail to realize is that most organizations run on norms, right? And if you want to freeze that middle, if you want people to start thinking differently about their work, then you've got to change the norms, because the norms really is what freezes people, right? So then how do you do that, right? And I think that's what we struggle with, because the rules around changing norms, or the ways you do it, are completely unfamiliar to big organizations, and especially the government. So that's the problem we need to solve, right? I think, and then you can get people to start. You can get things to start to thaw. But there's something else that it just is obvious as a first timer here. It's kind of obvious to me is that we're all preaching to the converted, and I think that the point of these types of events is that we should be bringing in as many people as possible who go, oh, this is crazy, I don't want to be part of this, because that's the only way you're going to get change to happen, right? There should be 1,000 people here next year, right? And there should be, a real effort on the part of everybody attending to say, look, I want to bring 5 people next year, right, who need to hear these discussions, because that's the only way you're going to make change happen over time. We got to create a movement, and this is not necessarily, this is the beginning of a movement, but the movement needs to be bigger, and it needs to have momentum. So I just wanted to say that as a first timer.
Speaking of momentum, we can no longer undo the momentum that our predecessors created. So my Navy friends remember the days when the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell existed, and the Strategic Studies Group existed, and then the CNO killed them, right? And then the new SecNav rolls in and creates the Navy Innovation Advisory Council. The new SecNav comes in and kills it. Now we have the Naval X that Hondo and the current SecNav have. What's going to happen when they leave? Right? So we can say, and then if Hondo's watching, we can say it's great. He came here yesterday, gave a speech, inspired a lot of people. Naval X is doing great things. Where's the billet structure that underpins what will live beyond him? Right? It goes back to JJ's comments yesterday about structure. The structure is not following the culture change to hardwire it in. Kessel Run's going to live because it's now hardwired in to how the Air Force does things. The Navy, we haven't done that. The other thing I'd like to point out, shine a light, Ian Eishen's not here today, but Ian Eishen shared with many of us a list of books that he was using to do NCO training. Rather impressive list of books. So as we stretch the minds of tomorrow's leaders and today's deck plate leaders, that's how we're going to change. It's not going to be here, getting each other excited and high fives as we go home. It's bringing those conversations into our respective work centers. It could be as simple as book clubs, wardroom training, what have you. It may not get into training objectives in the brick and mortar schoolhouses, but there's ways to stretch people's minds.
We have time for one more question. Behind you.
I appreciate it. So, I can talk on this topic all day. I love this. I'm a captain in the Army, so I love soldiers. I love this whole aspect of developing this innovation mindset throughout. But the challenge is, right, it's all, I agree, top-down leadership or top-down push for organizational change. However, I only found out about this through one of my buddies who messaged me, and it's not getting down to the guy on the ground, right? If we go back to the Mission Men and Me, it says you got to listen to the guy on the ground. So, I mean, my question on this, right? And so I'm on this. So, to build off your point, I have an issue with how we view problems, right? And the word problem in itself, I think, is very challenging because the DoD, military in general, is very like problem driven. All right. So how do we change that type of wording, like you're talking about, from a problem centric mindset to an opportunistic mindset and behavior that kind of floods the rest of the culture and organization?
I'll start since I have the mic. I think one aspect of that, and it's one small aspect, but it relates to the intro that you gave, which is the low levels. And I don't want it to come across that I'm top down. If you've ever heard me, Josh has heard me all the time, I say, like, Kessel Run was a grassroots movement, and there's a lot of people that swooped in to take credit for it, but I always want people to know, not because I want people to know, like, oh, Captain Kroger did this, but because I want other captains out there, other NCOs like Jeremiah, to know that they can do it too, and you don't actually need to convince a senior leader to give you backing and funding. I actually went against somebody's orders to get the OTA stood up for Kessel Run, fun fact. Tell it later, not in public. But so like I like when guys like Jeremiah get up and talk and tell their story, because it's not about him telling about how great he is, which I think sometimes people perceive. It's about realizing that you can be great as an NCO. You don't need to be the general to be able to do this. So that's just one thing I would offer up, is those people are usually the ones that are opportunistic because they understand the problem, but they also see the solutions. And we just need to make sure that they know they can do this and they don't necessarily need permission, which is one of my favorite Grace Hopper quotes, by the way.
So quickly, from a whole bunch of the trainings that we've done even this year, which is probably over 200 airmen at this point, but up and down the chain. And people want to solve their problems, and giving them the opportunity to say, I know the Squadron Innovation Funds pushed a significant portion of money down the chain, and how do you actually take that, and that in and of itself is an opportunity, but how do you match that with I am fighting this every single day and it's driving me crazy, how do I solve this? And changing that mentality. And I think part of why the money was pushed down the chain was to create the atmosphere so that people could start saying, well, money's not my problem. My problem is actually to figure out the solution to this thing that's driving me nuts. And I think that the more and more we have all levels of DoD, the Air Force, et cetera, that are actually thinking about that money is not the only need, right? But it is actually figuring out what those opportunities are based on what they are fighting every single day, and whether that's bureaucracy, whether that's different systems integration. There's a whole host of things that are driving people crazy, but solve those problems, and here's like a little bit of resources to help do so.
I think we have to have a completely different mindset, and it's one that's going to have to be built in the culture. And to simplify it, it's a left of boom mindset. So if we are going to win in the future, then we are going to have to out-anticipate our peer competitors with what's going to go boom. And so if we are only dealing with problems in the military or organization, then that is a lot of people going to die. And so we have to, in our culture and thinking through that, is really have everybody thinking left of boom, so that we are getting rid of problems before they happen. And in healthcare, I mean, that's absolutely huge. So when we talk about cultural change and things, you know, it takes 5 to 7 years. So when we talk about these changes and the leadership change that you really brought in, the only way that we're going to have this continue, those leaders at the 4-star level are going to have 3 generations down believing in what they're doing. So in our effort in zero harm, that's where we are. So we have full commitment for 3 more SGs, 9 years. I think that's the only way.
But to your point, you also need those leaders knowing and understanding what the right questions to ask are, and being able to lead in a digital transformation way that we probably just haven't set them up for success.
And now I'm feeling super self-conscious that I've been hard on leadership. And usually the group that I'm most hard on is the innovators themselves, this community. Actually, one of you said, you know, I think it was you, we should be branching out. And I agree, we need to branch out. But I also think we all have a lot of really bad habits at the grassroots level. And so one of them on this problem opportunity thing, I think most things die on the vine just because of the way that we treat risks in our organizations. And we have a really bad habit of saying leaders need to take more risk, or the frozen middle, or my immediate manager needs to take more risk. I think that's bullshit. I'm like one of these anti-risk people. So, and if you want to read Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb, I actually don't believe that. I think taking risk is really bad. But the truth is, like, and people are like, oh, you did Kessel Run. Like, how could, Kessel Run's the least risky thing that we've ever done. Like, it is way less risky than the way we were doing business before. Waterfall is risky. And I say waterfall is risk because, we don't measure the cost of delay, but that's the steepest cost of all. And in, Air Operations Center and targeting, that cost of delay is measured in lives. In medical, we heard from Chris Lynch the other day about people that were dying because of a stupid upload of TIFF JPEG instead of PDF. People died because of that. So the cost of delay is really steep. And so I think we need to get a lot better at communicating risk and not saying that buzz line of, take more risk. It's understand and more appropriately measure and work with risk. Since I don't have a lot of time, I'll just throw out another book recommendation of Measure What Matters, or Not Measure What Matters, How to Measure Anything by Doug Hubbard. If you really want a nerdy, like down in the weeds statistician view of how to measure risk and how organizations do it all wrong.
Last thought.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about leadership. I want to say something about follower-ship, right? So how many of you have seen that video, Derek Sievers creating a movement, right? The lone nut into a movement, and that's largely what DEF is doing. So two tours ago, I was a commanding officer of Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command. And in many respects, no different than Jen or Jason, I was a lone nut. Just so happens that my first follower is here today. That's Rebecca over here in the corner. And when we started to see things change, she's hiding now, was when we were able to inspire other lone nuts, give us the opportunity to follow them. Right? So I think that's where we are right now as a movement, is how do we nest behind others and show that DEF is supporting them create change, right? They are not following us to create change, but we are inspiring them to take some risk and us nest firmly behind them and support them in any and every way, shining the light on the significant progress they'll continue to make.
So, I mean, I agree with you. We could all talk about this topic all day long. An hour is certainly not enough time to do this. And just some of the things that you all said, I think, kind of wrapping it up in this idea that we need to understand both our own and our leadership's personal biases that are getting in the way of the urgency associated with the change that needs to happen, but also the creativity that's needed to problem solve. And so I would encourage you all to keep this conversation going. Use the Twitter feed. If you have specific things that you've done, highlight those, share those, best practices. I mean, that's what this is all about. I just want to thank all the panelists. Can we give them all a round of applause? And thank you all for all that you're doing. Really appreciate it.